Okay, so you're here with us again because, well, you want to understand what's really going on. Right.
Yeah.
And we all know it can be hard to get past all the noise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today, we're diving into something that I know has grabbed a lot of people's attention. The deployment of U.S. troops, active duty military, to the southern border.
Right.
And this whole thing stems from, the declared state of emergency around border crossings.
Yeah, a lot of talk about that.
So what we're going to do in this deep dive is really try to pull out those key details and think through, the potential implications of sending troops to the border. And to do that, we're going to be looking at an analysis from the Ring of Fire on YouTube.
Great source.
They break this down in a really interesting way.
They do. So right off the bat, they focus on this order that was signed by the acting defense secretary, the one to activate at least 1,500 active duty military members to deploy to the southern border.
Okay, so right away, 1,500 troops. That's the number.
So at least.
And something that the Ring of Fire's analysis picks up on that I thought was really interesting is this question of scale. Because this is all happening, in response to Donald Trump declaring this border emergency, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the video asks this question. Like, if this is truly an emergency on the scale that's being described, why are we only seeing 1,500 troops deployed?
Yeah, it makes you think.
Right. Like, shouldn't it be way more if it's such a huge crisis?
Exactly. And that's where I think the analysis gets really fascinating because they offer a couple of possible interpretations for this.
Okay, lay it on me.
So the first one is, maybe things at the border aren't quite as dire as some people are making them out to be.
Okay.
Particularly maybe within Republican circles.
You're saying they're exaggerating the problem.
Well, that's one interpretation the video puts forward. And if that's the case, then maybe this smaller deployment, 1,500 troops, maybe that's deemed sufficient. Now, the second possibility that the video throws out there, and this one's a bit more tongue-in-cheek, is that these 1,500 troops are like some kind of super soldiers, like the best of the best.
Okay, so like one of these guys could take out 10 regular soldiers.
Well, that's the idea. But the analysis doesn't really spend much time on that possibility.
Right.
It seems more likely that they're leaning towards that first interpretation, that maybe the crisis is being overblown.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if we're really talking about, an existential crisis at the border, then 1,500 troops just doesn't seem like enough, does it?
Exactly. And this is where the video starts to connect this specific deployment to the broader conversation about border security in general.
Okay, so how do they do that?
Well, they bring up border apprehension statistics.
Right. So for people who aren't familiar with that term, it just means, the number of people who are encountered and detained by border officials.
Exactly. And here's the thing. The source claims that those apprehension numbers were actually higher under the Biden administration than they were under Trump.
Oh, wow. So that kind of flips the script a little bit, right?
It does. It suggests that maybe Biden was statistically doing a better job on border security than Trump.
Even though a lot of voters thought Trump was stronger on that issue.
Right. Exactly. It's a really interesting point that the video brings up.
Definitely. So if the numbers don't really back up this idea of an unprecedented surge, then what are these troops really for?
That's the million-dollar question.
And the Ring of Fire, they put forward this other possibility that I found pretty unsettling.
Oh, yeah.
They say these troops might not actually be intended for, traditional border security.
So not just stopping people from crossing.
Right. Exactly. They're suggesting something else, something that happens more on the interior.
Inside the country.
Yes. So they're saying that these 1,500 troops could be used to conduct raids.
Raids?
Yeah, raids aimed at detaining and deporting undocumented immigrants, but not at the border, within communities, possibly even targeting places like schools and churches.
That's a big deal if true.
It's a very different picture than what you might expect when you hear about, troops going to the border.
Yeah, for sure.
And then building on that idea, the video puts forward this phased deployment theory, which is basically the idea that this initial deployment of 1,500 troops.
Okay.
Just a first step.
Kind of like a trial run.
Right. It's a way to get the public used to seeing the military involved in immigration enforcement before they potentially, ramp things up.
And then bring in more troops, maybe.
Exactly. And maybe start doing these raids on a larger scale.
So the Ring of Fire's analysis is really pointing to this potential disconnect, isn't it?
Totally. Like, on one hand, you have this declared state of emergency, this huge problem at the border, but then you have a relatively small number of troops being deployed.
And on top of that, you have these claims that apprehensions were actually higher under the previous administration.
It just doesn't seem to add up.
Right. And then at the core of it all is this argument that These troops may not be there to prevent border crossings at all, but to carry out deportations from within the U.S.
Which raises a whole other set of questions about, civil liberties and the militarization of immigration enforcement.
It does. It really makes you think.
Yeah. So as you're listening to this, think about it. What does it really mean to have active duty military deployed to the border
Yeah.
at this scale with this potential purpose?
Right.
What does that tell us about the direction of immigration enforcement in the U.S.?
Big questions, no easy answers.
That's definitely something worth thinking about.